have about 58 people in the room right now, and if Erica has more people, she'll let them in as they connect. So good evening, everyone. My name is May Cat. I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm located in Thunder Bay, Ontario. I'm actually from the Temagami First Nation, just north of North Bay. I am an RNAO member for many years, as well as I work for Anishinaabe Nation, and I'm the chair of our COVID-19 task team. So tonight's webinar, the Understanding Wellness and Indigenous Wisdom Traditions for Caregivers. We're happy that you joined us this evening. I wanted just to mention a couple of things to you while you're here is, try to keep your video and your cameras off during the session with our knowledge keeper. And there is a chat box, so I will be monitoring the chat box. I can take down any questions. Once the knowledge keeper is finished with her session, we can go back to some of those questions, or you can pose more questions. At 8:20, I'll be a timekeeper as well. At 8:20, we will go back into the plenary session, and the knowledge keepers will be able to answer any of your other questions that you may have. We've also are recording this, so if you want to see what the other knowledge keepers are presenting, there is a link that will be up on the RNA webpage that you can go in and watch any of the other sessions as well. So I'd like to introduce you to our knowledge keeper for this session, Teresa Red Sky. Fiddler is how I know her. I know her as Teri Fiddler. We work together on the NAN COVID-19 task team. So we've been working very hard to ensure that our workforce, the nurses who are in our communities, are supported. This is our third webinar, I believe, to provide support to the nurses who come to our communities. We do this because we want you to know how appreciated you are. So I'm going to let our knowledge keeper introduce herself. I'll go on mute, Teri, so I don't distract you. So you can start anytime.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us in our session. My name is Teri Fiddler. My given name was Teri Red Sky. So I use that in my work that was given to me by my parents, Teri Red Sky and Fiddler. I always introduce myself with my spirit name, which is Shonya Kamigok, and I belong to the Elk clan. And my guardian spirit, I always acknowledge my guardian spirit is the Mikinak, the turtle. And I also acknowledge my midday. I'm only in my first doorway. I've been told that by elders that sometimes in your lifetime you don't reach the 8th doorway. I'm from Sandy Lake First Nation. It's a community, isolated community. It's a fly-in community, and it's a population of over 3,000. But I'm originally from the Lake of the Woods area. I was brought up in a First Nation called Big Grassy River till I was about 7. Then my dad moved us to his home reserve, which is Shoal Lake 40 in the Lake of the Woods area. I got married when I was 18, and my husband and I raised 5 children, 2 daughters and 3 sons. But we also raised 2 grandsons, and I have 21 grandchildren, and I have 14 great-grandchildren. And so that's my introduction for now. May, is there anything else I should?
No, I think you can just for the next however long you want to go. My alarm's going to ring at 8:20, and then everyone's going to have to log out of this and go back to the plenary to listen to all the knowledge keepers together. So you can start your session, and this is being recorded as we mentioned earlier. I'm going to turn my camera off, Teri, so we don't distract you. I fidget a lot.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I didn't have anything prepared on paper. My late husband taught me when I first started working in this field that whatever I have to say must come from the heart. When you write something down, it doesn't reflect what you believe in and what you work with. My gift, I believe, came from my spirit name. A grandfather from Big Grassy River, I was told, gave me my spirit name when I was 6 months old. And during the time I was growing up, my mother, who was very traditional, she believed in ceremonies. She was going into her 5th doorway midday before she passed away, but she did four doorways. And I spent a lot of time with my mother growing up. I used to go with her in the bush to pick medicines. And but as a child, as everybody knows, as a child growing up, you prefer to play when you should be listening and paying attention. And that's one thing that I regret, that I didn't spend enough time with my mother, learning the medicines that she worked with. My mother was a midwife. She delivered many babies. And when there was difficulty in any birth that she attended, she knew the medicines to give to the mother to heal her physically and spiritually. And I also learned a lot from my grandmother, my dad's mother, when I was growing up. She left me a ceremony that I pass on as much as I can now. When I have the opportunity to be invited to youth conferences, that's where I'd like to share that ceremony that my grandmother left me. It's for young girls that reach womanhood. And the reason why that I really, really respect the ceremonies that were given to me is because I know the language. I have retained my language. Dan sinabi, I speak Ojibwe. I speak fluent Ojibwe, and I also speak fluent Oji Cree. I learned Oji Cree when I moved to my husband's community. Different dialect, almost the same, but retaining my language, I've been really grateful is to my parents and my sisters that I grew up with. I'm the youngest of 4 sisters, and all my parents both went to residential school. My dad went to residential school when he was 5 years old, and he never came out till he was 18. And my mother went to residential school, but she never spoke a word of English, even though she went to residential school for 2 years. she didn't go to classes. She was lucky to go to class maybe once a day. She was a seamstress in a residential school. And all my three sisters attended the same residential school that my parents went to. I remember a lot of times saying goodbye to my sisters in the fall, and I wouldn't see them again till spring. We were lucky to see them at Christmas. But I'm really grateful that my sisters, even though they went to residential school, retained their language too. They never lost it. And during the time I was growing up, I learned my language. That was the most important thing that I was able to retain. And knowing my culture, also the ceremonies that I attended. There was many ceremonies that I attended. My mother, my parents took me to ceremonies everywhere. I went to round dances. I went to powwows. I went to Wabanoan ceremonies. I watched my uncles do different ceremonies, and I tried to pay attention as much as I could. And I'm glad that I did, because today when I, as an elder, that helps me with preparing medicines today, and doing the duties, the expectations that as a knowledge keeper, I'm happy that I was able to retain my culture, because it helps you with wellness, self-care, and being able to help people, your relations. Right now, everybody is struggling with this COVID. And I've been given tobacco many times to prepare medicines for people. And I'm glad that these medicines were passed down to me by my mother and my grandmother and my father. I might be jumping all over the place, but I'm trying to explain how important language is in our culture. The one thing that I regret in my own family is I was able to retain my language, but because of the different communities that I lived in an Ojibwe. I come from an Ojibwe background, and I speak Ojibwe. So when I got married to an Oji Cree way up north, I switched to Oji Cree language. I learned the language. I had difficulty because it different dialect, but similar. But I was able to learn. So today I speak fluent Oji Cree. But the sad part is, when we were raising our children, my three sons, when we were raising my three sons, my stepdaughter was raised in a different family, but we raised my three sons and my daughter. We adopted my daughter when she was 5 days old. So we raised 4 children in our household. So they spoke Oji Cree when we were living in Sandy Lake, my husband's home community. So we had the opportunity to go and live in my home community in Shoal Lake 40. And when we moved there, my children who spoke Oji Cree would go to school and kids would make fun of them, how they talked. So they learned Ojibwe. 5 years we lived in Shoal Lake. They learned the language, and we were so proud of them because my mother didn't speak English, so she spoke Ojibwe to them all the time. Then we moved back home to Sandy Lake, and what happened was my sons, and they would speak Ojibwe, and the kids back home would make fun of them. So that was my mistake. That was our mistake as parents. We let them speak English, and they lost the language. Today, they're slowly retaining their language back. My youngest son, lives in Moose Factory. He's learning Cree. My middle son, he lives back home in Sandy Lake. He's starting to retain his language, and so is my oldest son. My youngest daughter is still struggling, trying to get the language back, but she's getting there. So we need to encourage our children not to lose their language. I made that mistake. I hope nobody else makes that mistake. And the other topic that I wanted to talk about is the community, how the community stays healthy. We have ceremonies. I grew up with ceremonies in Sandy Lake. We have elders that practice the ceremonies, and we have seasonal celebrations. In the summertime, we have what we call Wabanon ceremony. And at that ceremony, we honor the berries that grow every summer. Everybody comes together in a Wabanon, in a teaching lodge. And in that teaching lodge, there's elders there that you can approach to have spirit names. And that's another way of staying healthy in a community, is having spirit names, the importance of spirit names. I'll share a story of my late mother, of what she taught me. My mother always told me the importance of spirit names. And it's never too late. It doesn't matter how old you are, but it's always important for your children, your grandchildren, to have spirit names. My mother told me a story that when the time comes for you to start your spirit journey, there's going to be a path everybody walks in that journey. And in that journey, there's forks, but you keep going. You don't turn to the roads, the forks that you see. You keep going. And my mother said, at the end of that journey, there's going to be an elder that's going to be asking you, what's your spirit name? Anijnikazin. Anijnikazin. That's what they're going to ask you. And you have to have a spirit name in order for you to join your ancestors that have passed on, your loved ones that have passed on. So that's the importance of spirit names, and that's part of having a healthy life. That's why we always acknowledge our spirit names at the beginning of any ceremonies or any gatherings that we are asked to participate in. And another thing is, when my mother passed away in 1983, my dad at that time was devastated at his loss of a lifetime partner, and he turned to alcohol. So we decided, as the youngest of all my sisters, I was the one that would be the caregiver for my dad. So we went and picked him up in Kenora, and I took him up north. And I looked after my dad for 27 years. He was 94 when he passed. But during those years, I spent as much time as I could with my dad, learning different things from him. Sometimes I would wake up during the night and I would hear him singing with his hand drum. And the reason why he would be singing in the middle of the night is he was recording himself. He didn't want to lose that. He didn't want to lose that song because he was getting on in years. His memory wasn't that great anymore, but that was his way of retaining his culture too. But there's one thing that I learned from my dad as a caregiver for my dad. My dad taught me to believe in both cultures. My dad taught us to respect all beliefs, no matter what it is. If a person was a Christian, you respect that person. If a person believed in the ceremonies, sweat lodges, you respect that person. And the reason why I remember those teachings is while I was being a caregiver for my dad, when it was time to change his bedding, on the left side of his pillow was his Bible, and it was always open to Psalm 23. And right above his head, where his head was while he slept, were his eagle feathers and his pipe and his bundle. And every time I changed his bedding, I never closed his Bible. I would pick it up and put it on the shelf because I respected my dad's beliefs. And that's one thing that we need to do with our elders. We need to respect their teachings. And we need to respect the beliefs that they taught us. I want to move on and talk about my sons. My husband was a Nan elder for Anishinaabe elder for a long time, as was his dad. My late husband was a respected elder for Anishinaabe Nation. And he was also a sweat lodge carrier. He belonged to an organization in Thunder Bay called it was from a medical students, or there were medical students going there, and they used to come to it's called NOSM, Northern Ontario School of Medicine. And doctors, medical students used to come to Sandy Lake to work at the nursing station, to learn from the community. And my late husband spent hours with those medical students, teaching them, taking them into his lodge and teaching them the traditional ways, the medicines. And these medical students spent a lot of time with them. My late husband used to go into a ceremony called hooding with the graduate, when doctors graduated. But as a partner to my late husband, I always stayed in the background, but I supported everything that he used to do. And that's being part of a caregiver, being supportive of the teachings that you're getting, watching, learning. Learning is a lifetime thing to do. I'm still learning. I'll be 70 in May, and I'm still learning. My late husband was a pipe. He made pipes, traditional pipes. He made traditional pipes for the Executive Council for Anishinaabe Ashkee Nation. Every time there was a new Executive Council, he would make pipes. And my youngest son learned how to make pipes. He makes pipes now upon request. He'll make traditional pipes. And he's also a sweat lodge carrier. My middle son, he has a sweat lodge. My oldest son is a grass dancer. He dances, and he beads his own. He makes his own regalia. Every time I go and visit him, he's sitting at the table beading. And those are the things that you learn. You learn from your elders. My oldest son makes eagle whistles. And he stumbled upon that teaching. We used to attend sun dances in Saskatchewan, Alberta. And being a very curious young man, he seen these elders one time sitting outside a lodge, and he went and sat with them. And they were making eagle whistles. He ran back and he asked, "How do I learn?" I said, "Go give tobacco. Go give tobacco to those elders. They'll teach you how." And that's another teaching that we always remember. We have 4 medicines in our culture: tobacco, sage, sweetgrass, and cedar. Those are the main 4 medicines. And tobacco is the most important. When you want to learn from elders, make a tobacco tie and go give an elder tobacco. They'll teach you. They'll teach you what you want to learn. They'll talk about their culture, the importance of language, how culture keeps them healthy, keeps them well. They'll tell you their visions, how the visions that they have of healthy communities, the importance of being a caregiver, and how caregivers are very much appreciated in communities. Those are the topics that we are talking about this evening. My own vision for a healthy community is treatment centers. Today, our youth our young adults struggle with various addictions, with various mental health issues. We have many that have committed suicide. We have relations that have committed suicide. And suicide ideation is very rampant in our communities. Drug addiction, it takes over our young people. I envision treatment centers in every community. Might be impossible dream, but that's my dream. And hospitals. Right now we are struggling with a virus, coronavirus. And there's going to be many more other viruses in the future that will come. And we need hospitals in our communities. I dread the day if there's a virus that hits a community, and it has. We read and we hear about our Anishinaabe communities being stricken with this virus, and there's no hospitals in our communities, only nursing stations. And these nursing stations are, the capacity for nurses is very low. I know in my community in Sandy Lake, I think the nursing staff is maybe 10, maybe 12 nurses. We are lucky to have visiting doctors. But what if there was that virus went out of control in the communities? We're very short-staffed in our communities. Where some communities are lucky to have paramedics in their communities. So those are the things that I think about. How we can maintain our communities to be healthy. It's very hard. And right now, I talked about suicide in our communities. My family was stricken by suicide. My daughter-in-law, my oldest son's daughter, wife, my daughter-in-law, her name was Joyce. She committed suicide in 1997. And she left 4 children. The youngest was 13 months. And the oldest was 9 years old. During that time, my oldest son couldn't handle that. He couldn't function as a father, single father. So we ended up taking, even though we hated to do it, we had to split up the children. Because as part of our traditions in our communities, the elders in the community came to talk to us, both sets of parents, my late daughter-in-law's mom and dad, who are devastated by their loss of their daughter. And during that short time after my daughter-in-law passed away, I made an attempt to keep all 4 of my grandchildren. But the elders in our community came to talk to us. They said, the other grandparents are just as devastated. They need a reason to live. So they talked to us, and they ended up taking the oldest, the 9-year-old, and the 13-month-old. And my husband and I raised the two middle grandsons. They were only 6 and 7 at that time. Today, I'm proud to say that they're adults. They have their own families, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud of my grandchildren. They survived. We are all survivors in some way. My parents are survivors from residential school. I seen my dad, his hands full of scars from abuse, physical abuse. And one time he told me, I went in residential school left-handed. I came out right-handed because during those years, left-handed people were considered evil in residential schools. So he suffered a lot. And when those AIP hearings came about, I asked my dad, do you want to go through that process? My dad said no. No amount of money will ever bring comfort to the pain that I suffered. He said, I'd rather leave it the way it is. I forgive those people that abused me. So that was the end of that. My dad was a very kind and compassionate person. And that's where I learned from my dad. And that's where you need to learn. You have to approach elders in order for you to learn. I went to a conference in Winnipeg, an elders conference. And I remember one elder saying, when you're in ceremony, you don't have to be a traditional. In order to retain balance in our communities, we must go back to ceremonies. Not all of us may believe in ceremonies. As I said, I believe in both, respecting all beliefs. But I listened to this elder. He's a respected, gifted elder from Alberta. His name is Fred Campio. And he's been a mentor and part of my family for so long. And what he said is, in order to retain balance in our communities, in our lives, we must go back to ceremony. And ceremony doesn't have to be traditional, he said. We are all born in ceremony. Teachings are when we are carrying life. We are, as grandmothers, as mothers, as young ladies, we are all caregivers. When we are carrying life, we are in ceremony. Being a life giver is ceremony. Because Creator gave us life to carry life. So those are the teachings that I learned at that conference. We need to go back to the old ways. We need to learn the medicines that we were given. And so those are the teachings that I wanted to share this evening. And I also wanted to share that ceremony that my grandmother passed on to me. And I'm gonna tell a story. Because as you know, in order for us to understand what we are being taught, it's always a story. We always include stories in order for people to understand our teachings. When I was 13 years old, First of all, I'll start with when I was 7 years old. My grandmother came home from a hospital. She came home from a hospital where she had TB. And when she came home, I was 7 years old. Right away, in a traditional sense, in families, she took over my care. I slept with my grandmother. I ate what my grandmother ate, which was mostly traditional foods. I would sit outside with her in the summertime. She had a little cook stove, a little oven, and she would cook beaver, fish, all kinds of fish, moose meat, deer meat, muskrat. I ate everything that my grandmother cooked and fed me. That's the traditional way in families, in our Anishinaabe families. And when I was 13, I went and we didn't have, in those days, we didn't have the luxury of having washrooms. We didn't have plumbing. We didn't have running water. So we had what you call outhouses. And one morning, I woke up and I seen blood in my underwear. So being scared, I thought there was something very wrong with me. I went and hid in the outhouse. My grandmother looked for me. She waited for me at lunchtime to run home from school. I went to day school. And she waited for me and I never came. I was in the outhouse hiding. And that's where she found me. But instead of making me feel ashamed of what was happening to me, I reached womanhood. I reached that age where I was a life giver. And instead of making me feel shame, which I felt at that time, she celebrated my becoming a woman. What I didn't know was we went blueberry picking. We went down by the shore where we picked gooseberries. We went and picked strawberries and raspberries. And then we went to a maple tree where we gathered fruit, sweet fruit from bark. Then we went back to our home. And I remember her spreading a blanket on the ground. And it's a very close community, very close neighbors. And all of a sudden she yelled out, "Biandawisanik, come and eat, come and feast with us." And she gathered all the young girls that had reached womanhood. My sisters were there, my mother was there. And we had a feast. And what the teachings that she left for me is, you, as a woman, when you reach being a woman, you're every month when you have your period, that's the strongest time, your moon time. So that ceremony signified that when we sat down to feast the berries, before any girl ate any berries, she made us eat black ash from the fire that she made. And that signified a ritual, a ceremony that will keep those berries alive for a long time. And today, when I look at blueberries, I think about my grandmother and the teachings that she left me. So I pass that on, I pass that ceremony on to when I go to youth conferences. I will have somebody bring bowls of fruit. And there's always sacred fire burning at those youth conferences. I'll get somebody to gather some black ash. And I pass on that ceremony. I teach the young woman and young men that it's very important to have that ceremony in order for our berries to survive in the future. And that's the teaching that my grandmother left me. So it's very important to carry on the ceremonies that we have been fortunate to be given. And and that's the same thing with language. A lot of us have lost our language. And it's up to us to go and seek out that teaching to get back our languages. So those are the teachings that I wanted to share this evening. I carry a grandmother pipe. I wanted to show you my my grandmother pipe. I'm not going to take it out. The only time I'll take it out is when I want to smoke it, when I want to light it with prayers. But this is a grandmother pipe. My late husband made this for me 6 months before he passed. So I carry that all the time. I carry a lot of medicines that I've been fortunate to retain, and so so those are the teachings that I want to share. I don't know if I shared enough, but hopefully I did.
Miigwech, Teri. Thank you for your stories, especially, I think I was struck by a couple of your stories about your family and the hard times, right? The hard times in residential school, but still keeping that spirit of optimism and hope, right? And that's kind of what we teach our young people now. And what struck me was how unkind history has been to Indigenous people in this country, right? And yet how we've been able to retain language and ceremony and culture. And it shows, I guess, the other side is the strength that you're talking about. And I really appreciate that, because in some ways, as a nurse practitioner, for me, it gives me that balance, right, of knowing that we still work in communities where there's very serious health problems. And yet we know there's such a richness in the people, their origins, their history, and their traditions and their ceremonies. And I think, as a nurse working in the communities and with the people, especially doing what we're doing now with pandemic, planning, it's so important that there's such a greater power, I guess, or a greater good that we're all striving for, and we're all doing this together. If you look at the nurses who've come on to this call today. So we have about 7 minutes. If the audience and your listening, if you want to open up your mics, if you have a question, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. If you have anything you want to ask Teri, and then at 8:20 we move on to go back to the plenary, where there's still an opportunity to ask questions in the plenary as well. I just see a thank you for you, Teri, for sharing your stories, your strength, your wisdom as an elder, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Yeah, quite the family you have surrounding you. Big responsibility, but we're well prepared for that responsibility. Another miigwech for sharing your teachings. So yes, there's no questions. I was struck by how you're Wabanooan. So you know, you talk about the celebrations in the summer and how you celebrate those. And I remember as a young person being put on a plane, a charter, Hooker Air they called it. Do you remember Hooker Air?
Yeah, I do.
Anyway, so they chartered us from Timmins to Sandy Lake for Wabanoo, and they did it twice actually, but 1 year we were there. And when you talk about the elders and you go and talk to them and approach them, and you know how they take their time to start talking to you. So I think what they're teaching you is to be patient, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were there, and that summer was actually the summer that Elvis died. So when people ask you the question of where were you when Elvis died, well, I was in Sandy Lake at Wabanoo, and that summer learning about the berries. Yeah, because we were picking berries. So yeah, it's part of the journey, you know, that you have, I guess, as a you know, as a young person going through and working in Indigenous communities. You learn these teachings, you learn, you have these experiences, and they come back to you later, and you remember how important the ceremonies were to keep you, I think, on a path of, I don't know, I always thought, you know, again, this was before I was a nurse, a path to, I saw it as goodness, right? We have stories about goodness, and in some ways, you know, the Mino-Bimaadziwin word is about the good life, right? That part of our teachings. So I really appreciate everybody coming on this. You have about 4 minutes to make your way back to the plenary. I know that it took us a little while, so you have to log off this one and go back to the plenary. I thought somebody was putting this in. Oh, there it is. Okay. So you go back, go out of here. So you hang up from this one, you go back, hang up. I'm talking like a really old person with a phone, right? So you disconnect from this one and you go back into the plenary session, and it'll be 40 minutes of discussion with all the elders, knowledge keepers together. Okay, we'll see you in the next room.